Part 1, Overview of Syria's Current Situation, 2023 to 2024. 1. Briefly recap the Syrian civil war's timeline starting from 2011. 2. Mention the main players, the Syrian government under Bashar al-Assad, opposition groups, Kurdish forces, ISIS, and foreign actors like the US, Russia, and Israel. 3. State that the conflict is now in a phase of relative stability for Assad's government, but tensions are high with foreign interventions and regional dynamics shifting. The current situation in Syria, 2023 to 2024. Bashar al-Assad's government regained control of most of Syria with Russian and Iranian support after a decade of conflict. Despite this, significant parts of the country remain outside Assad's control, notably the northeast, Kurdish areas, northwest, Idlib, controlled by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and some areas controlled by US-backed forces. Economic crisis and infrastructure damage. Syria's economy continues to struggle, with international sanctions, a collapsed currency, widespread poverty, and a lack of basic services. The government's ability to maintain control is tested by economic hardship and a lack of resources to rebuild war-torn infrastructure. Diplomatic shifts. In 2023, there was a gradual thaw in Syria's regional isolation. Syria was reintegrated into the Arab League after years of diplomatic and economic sanctions. Increased talks with neighboring countries like Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Collapse of the Syrian government, myth or reality? Is the Syrian government collapsing? Although Assad has regained control of most territories, the government is far from stable. It's struggling with widespread corruption, reliance on Iran and Russia, and internal dissent. Kurdish areas. The Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, and the Syrian Kurdish YPG continue to control significant parts of northern Syria, notably in regions like Kobani, Manbij, and Raqqa. The SDF is supported by US forces, but tensions with Turkey remain high due to their links to the PKK, Kurdistan Workers' Party. 2. Opposition forces and Idlib. The northwest, particularly Idlib, remains a stronghold for opposition groups like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, formerly affiliated with al-Qaeda. Though not directly challenging Assad's control in Damascus, these groups still destabilize parts of the country. 3. Challenges to Assad's control. Despite Assad's military victories, his regime is weak due to these fragmented territories and significant opposition forces that remain active. His ability to rule the entire country is questioned, especially when it comes to long-term peace and governance. Economic and social tensions could trigger further uprisings and challenges to his rule in the future. Separatist groups and US involvement. US-backed Kurdish forces. 1. The US has supported the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, and the YPG, People's Defense Units, which are primarily Kurdish factions. 1. This is mainly to combat ISIS and other jihadist groups. 2. The US has been providing military aid, including weapons, training, and air support, in regions like Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, and Hasaka. 2. In exchange, the US has a military presence in these areas, mainly in oil-rich parts of northeastern Syria. 3. Turkey's opposition to the US role. Turkey sees the Kurdish forces as a terrorist threat due to their ties with the PKK, and this has created tensions between the US and Turkey, a NATO ally. Other separatist groups and US funding. The US has also provided support to other factions in Syria, both Kurdish and Arab, as part of a broader strategy to maintain influence in the region and prevent the resurgence of ISIS. However, the fragmentation of these groups poses a challenge to US objectives. There are dozens of smaller, often competing factions that receive varying degrees of support from the US. Israel's role and the Greater Israel Concept. CIA's role in other rebel groups. The CIA has historically supported opposition groups aimed at toppling Assad, especially in the early years of the conflict. These groups, however, have often been infiltrated by extremist elements, weakening the US position in the conflict. Israel's role and the Greater Israel Concept. Israel's strategic interests in Syria. 1. Israel has been deeply involved in Syria, primarily through airstrikes targeting Iranian and Hezbollah positions in Syria, as well as other militia groups aligned with Iran, including Iraqi and Afghan fighters. 2. The Israeli government, under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has made it clear that it will not tolerate a permanent Iranian military presence in Syria. Israel's military operations aim to prevent Iran from establishing a permanent foothold in Syria, fearing that it could be used as a base for launching attacks against Israel. Greater Israel concept. The concept of Greater Israel is a controversial theory that proposes the expansion of Israel's borders to include territories like the West Bank, Gaza, parts of Syria, and Jordan. Some believe that Israel has an interest in annexing parts of southern Syria, particularly the Golan Heights, which it has occupied since 1967. Israel has built settlements in the Golan Heights, and the area remains strategically important for both military and water resources. Although Israel has not formally declared an interest in expanding its borders, its military and political actions in Syria, particularly the Golan Heights, hint at this longer-term strategic vision. Golan Heights. The Golan Heights, which Israel controls, is a key area in Syria's conflict. Israel has consistently defended the Golan Heights against Syrian attempts to retake it, and any instability in Syria is seen as a direct security threat to Israel. There are also fears that Hezbollah or other Iranian-backed forces might use the region as a launchpad for attacks against Israel. Israel and Syrian opposition groups. Israel has provided humanitarian aid to Syrian rebels, especially in the southwestern part of Syria, near the Golan Heights, although this has been officially downplayed. Israel is concerned with keeping Iranian-backed forces away from its borders and will continue to engage in targeted operations as necessary. The future of Syria. Is there a path to peace? Ongoing fragmentation and proxy wars. Syria remains deeply fragmented. The Assad regime controls most of the population centers, but large parts of the country remain either under Kurdish control or opposition held. The presence of foreign powers, the US, Russia, Iran, and Israel, makes peace negotiations difficult, with each pursuing their own agenda. Assad's challenges in the long term. While Assad may maintain power in the short term, his government faces immense internal and external challenges, including economic collapse, lack of legitimacy, and ongoing regional instability. Future peace efforts may require compromises between various factions, but it seems unlikely that Syria will ever fully return to its pre-war state. Conclusion. The road ahead for Syria. The situation in Syria remains tense and complex, with multiple foreign powers, separatist movements, and local factions all playing significant roles. As Syria faces both internal and external pressures, the government's ability to fully stabilize the country is in question. The roles of the US, Israel, Iran, and other regional actors will likely continue to influence the course of the conflict in the coming years. The ongoing struggle in Syria, both politically and militarily, will likely shape the region for decades to come.